As Raina settled into her seat at the cafe, she was startled to see Rick walking in and making his way directly toward her table. Rick and his wife, Louise, had been neighbors to Raina and her husband, Brad, for nearly 4 years. Though Rick and Louise were slightly older, in their early 40s compared to Raina and Brad's mid-30s, the two couples had grown quite close. They had even vacationed together, both with and without their children. "What a surprise!" Raina exclaimed, her voice tinged with excitement as she glanced over her shoulder at Rick's approach. "Shouldn't you be at work?" Rick offered a faint smile as he sat down across from her. "I could say the same to you," he replied evenly. "I took the afternoon off to handle some personal matters. I assume you did the same?" Raina nodded. "It's been a hectic morning, and I just needed a little time to recharge. That's all. I didn't realize you were a fan of cafes like this." "I'm not," Rick admitted, holding her gaze. Raina quickly looked away, and Rick continued. "Honestly, I saw you walking in and decided to join you. We need to talk." Raina's eyes widened. "Is something wrong? I hope nothing's happened to Louise." Rick lowered his gaze momentarily, then offered her a reassuring smile. "No, everything's fine. Thank you for your concern. You and Brad have become very important to us, and we know we can count on you if anything were to happen. I wouldn't hesitate to do the same for you. But that's exactly why I needed to come here." "What's going on?" Raina asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm just a little nervous," Rick confessed. "Have you been intimate with him yet?" Raina's face flushed with shock. "What? I don't know who you mean. Who are you talking about?" "The one you keep glancing at through the door," Rick said calmly, his tone almost casual. Raina's heart skipped a beat. "Did you or did you not sleep with him?" "No, not at all," Raina stammered, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She instinctively moved her arms, trying to brush off the tension, but Rick only shook his head. His expression softened as he closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he gently placed a hand on hers, his touch almost paternal. "You need to hear me out," he said. "I'm going to explain what's really going on, what you probably think is happening, and most importantly, what he thinks about it. That's the key." Raina nodded, trying to steady her racing thoughts. "He's charming," Rick continued, his voice low and steady. "Either younger or more successful than Brad, and he seems to have qualities Brad doesn't. He listens when you pour your heart out, offers compliments when you need them, and is always there when you want someone to lean on. He's even willing to make sacrifices for you, right?" Raina felt her body stiffen, unsure how to respond. "How do you know all of this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Does Brad know?" "Of course he suspects," Rick answered. "And you know he does. But he doesn't have the proof. Still, those suspicions must make him feel like a fool, don't they?" Rick said, his voice steady but firm. Raina swallowed hard, her thoughts spinning wildly. Rick leaned forward, his expression serious. "Let me tell you what's happened. Over the past 2 weeks, 2 significant events slipped by you, and it was for the same reason. Something came up with him, and he needed you as a friend. You felt obligated, so you missed both your son's birthday and your 9th anniversary dinner to be there for him." Raina's voice trembled as she tried to defend herself. "Nothing happened between us. We're just friends. The kind of friend you keep hidden from your husband because he wouldn't understand." Rick's tone was matter of fact. "This friend wants to know everything about your husband, doesn't he? So you've shared all those private details, things you probably wouldn't even tell me. And he supports you, pretending it's all Brad's fault when things go wrong. I bet even Brad's suspicions about something happening have been twisted into proof of what a terrible husband he is." Raina's jaw dropped. "How do you know all of that?" Rick nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Let's be honest here. Was it the day you missed your son's birthday or your anniversary dinner, when he kissed you and confessed his feelings for you?" Raina's face paled as she looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "When I missed our anniversary," she whispered, "it was because he was grieving the loss of an old friend. It just happened, but I stopped it right away." Rick gave a small nod. "So, let's take a real look at this. Your defensive behavior, the fact that you're sitting here right now, waiting for him, I think things may have gone a bit further than just a kiss. No sex, but enough that if you caught Brad doing the same thing, you'd likely consider it cheating. Still, you feel partly to blame because Brad isn't the husband you want, as he has pointed out. He's just a friend, giving you what you think you're missing at home. Even so, you're drawn to him. His attention, while flattering, is unsettling. But you convince yourself that nothing has happened, though deep down, a part of you feels guilty and hopes Brad never finds out. Are you going to tell him? Raina asked, her voice barely audible. Rick raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. So, you admit I've been right about you? I can predict your actions because I've guessed how you feel. You and I both know the truth. You slept with him, didn't you? Tears welled up in Raina's eyes as she looked down, nodding in quiet confirmation. I tried to stop it. Rick, we didn't go all the way, but we were close. I was angry and drunk, and Brad was being, well, stupid. I made a mistake. Rick sighed, his expression softening with sympathy. That's exactly what I thought. You've just proven him right, Raina. Raina wiped her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. No, I'm not going to tell Brad anything. He'll figure out in his own time, I guess. Okay, Rick continued, his tone calm but firm. Now, let's talk about what he thinks is happening. Mr. Charming sees a woman who's distracted, vulnerable, and ripe for manipulation. Raina flinched but stayed silent as Rick raised a hand to stop her from interrupting. Don't interrupt me, Raina. Mr. Charming isn't as naive as he looks. This isn't his first time around the block. He knows exactly what he's doing. You're assuming he's targeting you, but that's not the case. He wants you, sure, but he's also playing a game with Brad. Raina's heart raced. No, he doesn't want to hurt Brad. I'm sure of it. Rick shook his head. It's not about you. It's about Brad. Mr. Charming thrives on taking things from him, getting under his skin, making him feel insecure. He convinced you to skip 2 major events that would have meant something to Brad, to show you that he means more to you than your husband does. Think about it. The death of his friend, and whatever crisis came up just happened to fall on those same days you missed, didn't it? Coincidence? Not likely. Raina shuddered, her voice barely a whisper. Brad's birthday is in 3 weeks. I won't let it happen again, Raina said, her voice trembling. Rick raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. You were in his arms while your husband sat waiting for you at the restaurant for an hour. You texted Brad some excuse about a friend getting food poisoning, but you didn't even bother to come up with a real name, did you? Raina looked down, her face burning with shame. Rick continued, his tone firm. Now, here you are, skipping work and everything else, all because of him. You've made it clear where your priorities lie, and it's not in your marriage. Raina took a deep breath, her voice shaky. But he wants me. That's all. He doesn't want Brad to know about us. Rick let out a quiet laugh. Of course he doesn't. He knows all about Brad, every little detail you've told him. He's aware that Brad has every right to be suspicious, and he's playing on that. He's making you question everything, pushing you toward that line where it feels like everything is justified. He needs that rift between you two to keep the game going. And once he has you completely, once he feels like he's won, that's when he'll let Brad find out. Raina's eyes widened in shock. How do you know all of this? Rick smiled faintly. My wife, Louise, and I have been happily married for many years, but I haven't always been married. I know how these things work. You've got 2 choices, Raina. Continue down this path, lying to yourself and convincing yourself it won't turn into something more, or face reality. End this now and try to salvage your marriage. Raina's chest tightened as she struggled to find the words. I don't want Brad to find out. Rick sighed and shook his head. If you keep this up, you won't have a choice. He'll make sure Brad finds out. Maybe even lie about what's really happened between you two. You need to stop this before it's too late. Tears welled up in Raina's eyes. Please, I can't let him know. Rick walked over to her, pulling her into a brief hug and whispering softly, Then don't do anything. Don't even give him a peck on the cheek, unless Brad knows. Otherwise, you could be sure he'll find out, and it'll be worse for you both. As he stepped back, a voice came from behind him. Is that man bothering you? Rick turned to see a tall, slender man with a thick beard standing there. "You must be Reed," Rick said, holding out his hand. Reed hesitated for a moment before shaking it. Rick squeezed Reed's hand firmly, pulling him closer and whispering in his ear, "Listen to me. If you make a scene or try anything stupid, I'll make sure your finger ends up broken. Don't talk to my wife, and don't talk about her, or there will be consequences." Reed winced as Rick released his hand. "Who the hell are you?" Rick leaned in, his voice low and menacing. "Since you're so interested, let me tell you, I'm the only one you can talk to about this. You've got your hand in the cookie jar, but don't be foolish enough to lose it over something ridiculous. She's not worth it." Reed rubbed his hand, clearly shaken. "No, she's not. Definitely not." Rick stood up straight and looked at Raina, his expression hardening. "You've got a second chance. Go home and be the kind of wife your husband deserves. I know it won't be easy, but tell him the truth. Tell him he was right to suspect something, but that you stopped before it got worse. Don't mention me. It's better that way. Brad will be angry, but he'll want to move forward. And trust me, he'll be glad to know the truth." Raina wiped her eyes, still trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. Rick's voice softened. "I didn't do it for you, Raina. I did it for Brad, and to make up for my own mistakes. Take care."